Welcome to the Learning Blueprint, Crafting Behavioral Change in L&D. This is the go-to podcast for leaders who are passionate about driving impactful learning and development initiatives within their organizations. Each episode, we will dive into the strategies, tools, and insights that can help you sculpt the future of workplace learning. In this episode, we're going to look at content-based learning and actually why it's ineffective. So, content-based learning, what we're talking about is when you have information that you want your learners to be able to know, like a process, a strategy, principles. Sometimes it's even real tactical, like, hey, building widgets and the steps to build widgets. That you have, that's what we call the content, the information that we kind of can document, right? That's often where organizations start, right? They come, you as a learning professional, or maybe as an organization, you're saying, hey, we need sexual harassment training. Okay, cool. What are the components of sexual harassment? What do we want to cover? We start to just outline that. And that's really what most people are familiar with. The school systems, by and large, certainly starting to shift a little bit, but that's what they do. They have certain content information that they want to share. And that's what they do. They put someone in front of the room. They provide content. They expect people to retain that content, and then they give them some sort of a test to say, hey, do you know that content? So people are really familiar with that. And that sounds like a good way to go, right? If I have a need for, even with compliance stuff, that's where you see it often, but maybe it's not compliance. Maybe it's how to use Excel, right? There's a lot of information you can provide learners in order to use Excel. What we want to talk about today is that as a model or as an approach is actually an ineffective model. So if you're in an organization or even in the school system and you're providing really good learning, but it's from the here's the information you need to know lens and not the here's the behaviors we want you to do with that content, and you're finding that it's just not working. Maybe people can pass a test, but they're not changing their behaviors. Nothing's changing. It's because you're focused on the content and not the outcome. And I just want to say, when we talk about that statement I just made, that we're focused on the content and not the outcomes, people always will push back and say, well, the content is important. Sure, to some degree, but then I always challenge, is it really? Because if somebody, hypothetically speaking, if somebody could do the behaviors you want them to be able to do and not know the content at all, would you be better off than if they knew the content and couldn't do the behaviors? The answer is yes, right? If people could go do the stuff that you want them to be able to do within an organization, but they can't tell you why, they can't explain it to you, or you're going to be better off if they could just tell you all the details about that thing, but then when they go to do it, they don't do it, right? So it isn't the content-based learning isn't ineffective when we also just know from the hierarchy of learning, scratch that. We also know from the data around retention rates that telling people the content or even having people do something with that content without reflection only gets you about 10 to 20% of retention of that information. Now, we don't really even care about retention, remember, right? We care about people doing the behaviors. So at best, if you're taking a content-based approach to learning, that we just really want people to know the content, we're going to assess the fact that they can tell us back the content, they can regurgitate the content. You're going to have good test results, you're going to have good data that this training is working, but then in real life, there's going to be a gap. Something isn't happening, and that is the behaviors aren't happening, even though they're able to know what it is. So remember in the previous episode, we talked about we start with outcomes and then get to the content, rather than flipping that script where we start with the content and then figure out what we want to do with that content. We want to know, what do we want our learners to be able to do?
Looking to bring a real change to your team's learning and development? Then you need Legacy Learning Consulting. We're all about creating custom learning strategies that truly make a difference. Whether you're aiming to boost team performance or enhance leadership skills, we've got you covered. Dive into what we offer by visiting legacylearningconsultingllc.com. Start crafting your team's legacy in learning with us today. That's legacylearningconsultingllc.com. We can't wait to work with you. Schedule a time to discuss with Jason in the episode description below.
So we see this content-based all the time. I already mentioned school systems typically have this approach. Go to a seminar, and you're going to, almost every session you go to at a seminar is not going to be a workshop type thing. It is going to be a content-based presentation. Somebody's going to stand in front of you. They're going to have some sort of visual presentation, and they're going to talk at you. Even if they engage you with one or two questions, they're going to talk at you. And one of my favorite things in the learning development field is when you go to training programs for yourself to learn how to be a better learning development professional, we often don't follow the strategies that we're encouraging people to do in those sessions. So even in those places, even in the conferences for learning development, you often will have keynote speakers talking at you with the expectation that you would learn something. And we know that that's incredibly ineffective. So you also will see this in compliance training. You see this a lot, actually, in your process training. Like, this is what the steps are to something. Often you will have, processes lend themselves very easily to doing outcome-based learning experiences, right? Because if there's a process to be done, you can create pretty easily a learning experience where people do that process. But even in those situations, we tend to see content-based training where it's, here's the steps, here's how you use it, what questions do you have? Cool, wrapping up our session or wrapping up the e-learning module. So if you listen to anything of us, you know that we're really focused on outcomes and behaviors. And so when we look at what is the best strategy, content-based is not the best strategy. At Legacy Learning Consulting, we actually say that we are topic agnostic. And we don't say this in a minimizing way, but we do say it for the shock factor that we don't care about the information. I don't care what information you have that you want your learners to know. What I care about, we're going to dive into, is what are those outcomes, and then how do we use your information to get them to be able to achieve those outcomes. And as a learning professional, that's the language, that's the conversation you should be having with your organization, with your stakeholders, with your SMEs, because that's what really matters. Of course, we need the content. I've taught people how to fly an airplane, but I can't fly an airplane because I was working with a SME who knew the right information, right? But he didn't know how to help people learn. And that's where we come in. And if we start with outcomes, we can easily start to mold that content into a outcome-based learning experience. And so if you're going to take an assessment, here's some indicators for you of whether you're doing content-based learning experience. If one of the first things that you ask when you're developing a learning experience is, what information do we need to give them? What do we need to tell them? What do they need to know? Those kind of things are indicators to you that you're doing a content-based learning program. If you're doing an assessment that's really just question answers, multiple choice, fill in the blank, where you're looking for specific answers, those are indicators for you that you're doing a content-based learning strategy. Another one is, if you look at your output, the training output, the deliverables, the things that you're going to use in training, whether that's e-learning modules or PowerPoints or videos, if they are focused on the what, the information, but it is never talking about the how or where do you go with that information, the so what part, not even talking, but giving learners a thing to go do with that information in a way to measure and reflect, then you're probably doing a content-based learning approach. And so we challenge you to think of it slightly differently, not throw out the content, not get rid of it, but to shift it to say, okay, let's start with our outcomes. Now, where do we map the content to those outcomes? So keep going, looking at those outcomes, drive the outcome, let the outcomes drive your learning experiences and the content that you use. Thank you for tuning in to the Learning Blueprint, crafting behavioral change in L&D. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and follow us on your preferred social media channels to continue the conversation and stay up to date on the latest trends, strategies, and success stories in L&D. Join us next time as we further explore the world of learning and development. Until then, keep forging pathways to meaningful behavioral change in your workplace. And don't hesitate to reach out via social media with your thoughts, questions, or topics you'd like to see us cover. Here's to shaping the future of your organization, one behavior at a time.